Lewis Hamilton's Spa nightmare continues as Max Verstappen stuns McLaren in the F1 sprint before Lando Norris defeats Oscar Piastri to pole position for what looks set to be a very wet Belgian Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks with another spectacular background. Although, Ian, it's worth pointing out the clouds are forming behind you, I will say. Let's quickly get on, though, and discuss the first F1 session of the day, the F1 sprint. And in all honesty, not a lot really to discuss, apart from, of course, something you predicted, if I remember correctly, and that was Max Verstappen taking the lead at Le Combs on the opening lap.
And then pretty much that was it, wasn't it? Let's move on to qualifying. No, in full fairness, look, it's as I anticipated, really, given the setting that was on Max's car compared to the McLaren's. As we saw, yes, Max got Oscar Piastri, beautiful move into the Le Combs chicane, and obviously on row 2 we saw Charles Leclerc pass Lando Norris to take 3rd place into Le Combs. And then amongst the top 4, there was only one other overtake, and that was Lando reclaiming 3rd from Charles, because as close as Oscar Piastri managed to get to Max throughout the remainder of the 15 laps, constantly within DRS range, once the DRS was allowed to be used, not once was he able to get into a position to align Max in his sights and even attempt an overtake, never mind actually draw alongside and force his way past. So it just gave you an idea, unfortunately, as to the situation that has occurred in recent times with regards to Spa-Francorchamps. And Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, actually brought it up in his post-qualifying media session just now, that whereas Spa had always been renowned as a circuit at which you could overtake, nowadays, given the evolution and development of the current car under these regulations, we saw just how difficult it has now become to produce a good overtaking maneuver once we have DRS in place. So we're going to add to that a little bit when I know we're going to get onto post-quali and looking ahead towards the race on Sunday, because Andrea also came up with a very interesting fact on that as well.
Yes, to very quickly go through the top 10 from the sprints, because in all honesty, there's not really much else to discuss from that. It was Max Verstappen victorious, ahead of Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc in 4th, Esteban Ocon in a brilliant 5th, Carlos Sainz 6th, Ollie Bearman in 7th, and Isaac Hadjar scored the final points in P8. So let's move on to qualifying, and in many ways, it was deja vu from what happened in SQ1 on Friday. Kimi Antonelli, he was out in Q1. Lewis Hamilton, it appeared at first, had just about progressed to Q2. However, his best lap was deleted for exceeding track limits at Raidillon. It goes from bad to worse for the 7-time world champion and Antonelli.
Yeah, Lewis's lap was actually good enough to finish inside the top 10 as the session was concluding. But as you say, Nick, pretty much moments later, that lap gone, that demoted Lewis back down to 16th place and out in Q1 to follow his shock of the SQ1 exit, which, as we saw, a couple of mistakes there. Wanted to Stavolo with a rear snap on the car. And then, of course, that rear lockup, of course, going into the bus stop chicane that forced him out in that session. So, yes, quite obviously, Lewis was at least honest with his appraisal, apologizing to Ferrari, and he used the word unacceptable to his performance. Very strong word from Lewis there, and quite rightly, yes, these past 2 days have been quite unacceptable from the 7-time F1 champion. He's now made it very hard on himself to get anywhere near the points going forward. The wet weather, could it play its part? If it's anything to go by, as we saw in Silverstone, the way the Ferrari reacted there, it could actually make things even worse for Lewis and Ferrari. Let's wait and see. But as you're saying, it, these grey clouds are slowly beginning to build. Just a quick note on the weather. We are expecting it to start raining through the night, going into the morning. And then it really is a case of, let's see what unfolds throughout the day. At the moment, it looks like we've got prolonged periods of rain, not torrential downpours like we've had in the past that once caused that race to be abandoned after only a few laps behind a safety car. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that kind of level of downpour, but at least it feels right now that we are going to get a level of rain that's most definitely going to make it a very interesting race on Sunday.
I heard quite a funny story about, I think it was 2021 with the race that took so long to happen, but I might share that in the podcast on Monday. We'll see what happens on Sunday. I think Kimi Antonelli as well. I mean,
Yes.
it's just not, Europe is not being kind to him.
No, and again, his appraisal was also honest. A word on Kimi as well, because just to let people know, they might not be aware, but on qualifying Saturday, when the first 5 drivers are eliminated in Q1, they immediately go to the TV and written media pen and they conduct their interviews. So, and of course, at the end of Q2, you get the 5 drivers, etc., etc. And of course, you get the 7 that aren't in the top 3 that follow at the end of Q3. Kimi Antonelli did not appear until all the other drivers had been and gone from both Q2 and Q3. He was the last driver to make an appearance. It was actually noticeable that he got a tissue in his hand and his eyes were quite red. Read into that what you will. Had he got emotional and upset, or was it a little bit of hay fever? Given the length of time that it actually took him to appear in the pen, you've got to figure that perhaps things maybe got the better of him on this occasion. And if that's the case, then you've got to feel a little bit sorry for Kimi, because he is, as you pointed out, Nick, and as we commented as well in the F1 update on Friday, that he is being put through the absolute ringer at the minute. The European Grand Prix season so far has been an absolute nightmare for him. It's continued today. He's admitted that he feels that he's now trying to overdrive the car to try to atone for what's going on. The car isn't quite as he would like it, but he has said that he's actually making it worse by what he's trying to do. So if that is the case, it's now up to him and not quite naturally the team around him. So to Wolf, Pete Bonington, his race engineer, of course, as I'm sure they've been doing already, but this is the time when they've really got to put everything they can, their arms around Kimi. And because at the end of the day, you've got to remember, he's still a very young man at the end of the day. He's only 19 years of age. So he's still got a whole career ahead of him. We know he's a bright young talent, but right now, this is a real tough grind for Kimi, and you can only hope he manages to find a way through it.
Apologies to the viewers, you can hear a loud noise on my end. All of a sudden, at the Formula E, on the EP, they just started cleaning the circuit following the first race of the weekend. So apologies if you can hear that. Hopefully you can't, but just in case. We got to discuss the weekend, the things that happened towards the front of seeing Q3. I think it's important before we discuss the McLarens, we do speak about Max Verstappen, because as you mentioned in the sprint, it was impossible for Oscar to get close to him, even with DRS, because of Red Bull running a low downforce setup on Max's RB21. Now, it does appear they've learnt their lesson, of course, from Silverstone, where Max was phenomenal with a low downforce setup in the dry. It was a disaster for him in the wet. Due to the forecast and the rain expected on Sunday, Red Bull has added significant downforce compared to what they were running to the RB21, a much bigger rear wing, meaning he only qualified in 4th behind both McLaren's and Charles Leclerc. Of course, as you can now discuss, Lando did get the better of Oscar for pole, but it does feel that Max is the one who, what's he going to do on Sunday with that more downforce?
Well, at least he's going to be in the mix. In all fairness, he should have been 3rd on the grid.
He should.
Helmut Marko conceded that Max quite rarely made a couple of mistakes on his key lap, and that really undermined his position on the grid. Nevertheless, we've seen what happened in the sprint when you have that kind of setting, in particular on that first lap, because that's the key one that's really going to play certainly to the strength of Charles Leclerc, who starts 3rd. And I'm going to get onto that Andrea Stella comment. Yes. Charles has got a low downforce. I will get onto Max in a second, folks. Charles has got a low downforce setting. Andrea Stella is pretty confident, and he turned around and said that he would not be surprised if Charles Leclerc was leading by the end of lap 1, even though he's got both McLarens in front of him on the grid to get past. That's because he feels that given the setting on the McLaren compared to the setting on the Ferrari, it's described as Lando and Oscar as being exposed to the Ferrari. So quite a good, nice power word there from Andrea Stella to outline just what he's anticipating going into that first lap. He will remind his drivers, of course. He pointed out that, don't worry, guys, this race is not won and lost on lap one. It's a 44-lap race. We've got pit stops, we've got tyre changes, and of course, we've got the weather. So ultimately, it could, yes, play into Max Verstappen's hands.
It could.
If it was a dry race. It could be very different, however, given what we're going to anticipate with the wet weather if it does fall. At least, as you pointed out, Nick, the Red Bull will be better equipped at the Spa-Francorchamps circuit than it was 3 weeks ago at Silverstone to cope with that wet weather.
And just very quickly, in for about 30 seconds, Lando on pole, Oscar in second. It is an all McLaren front row, but as you pointed out, they do face a challenge, particularly on the opening lap.
Yes, as I just mentioned, from Charles Leclerc in particular. And of course, it's going to be a battle between the two of them as to
It is.
If Charlie's leading, who's going to be second and third out of the two McLarens? Now we saw we saw quite clearly the power of the hole that's punched in the air by the lead car down the Kemmel Straight leading into Le Mans. That allowed, quite obviously, Max to get past Oscar, and of course Charles to get past Lando going into Le Mans, the chicane down at the end of the Kemmel Straight. So Lando, yes, he's got pole, and he's managed to turn the tables on Oscar. Huge deficit at the end of sprint qualifying, 0.6 of a second between those two guys. So at least Lando learned a considerable amount going into qualifying, managed to get pole position, but does that now make him the more vulnerable should it be dry at the start of the race? He's in definite pole position if it is wet, because he is then more than likely going to keep his lead position, because that is going to make it incredibly difficult for Oscar Piastri to get past it, even Charles Leclerc to get past either of them, given the wet conditions. And if we've got plumes of spray coming off those cars as well, going down the Kemmel, it will just create for an almighty blind spot for any cars following behind the lead car, should it happen to be Lando going down the Kemmel, heading into the Le Mans chicane.
It's going to be a fascinating race for sure. To quickly run through the top 10 provisionally on the grid for the Belgian Grand Prix. It is Lando Norris on pole, ahead of Oscar Piastri, Leclerc in third, Verstappen fourth, Alex Albon in a spectacular fifth for Williams, ahead of George Russell and Mercedes for sixth. Yuki Tsunoda made it to Q3. Well done, Yuki. He starts provisionally in seventh. Isaac Hadjar in eighth, Liam Lawson ninth, and Gabriel Bottas left in a brilliant 10th. For those who are watching this video, please do let us know your thoughts on qualifying and looking ahead to the race in the comments below. Please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and all I can say is for myself and Ian, keep an eye on the sky. See you later.
Could be a fascinating one, folks, and we know what it's like when the wet weather falls. Take care as always. Thanks for watching and listening.